Hi, my name is Jamie Tomey, and I am pleased to welcome you to the Evanston Bound Curator series, brought to you by Artist Book House. Each week we get to talk to some amazing book artists and writers, letterpress printers, and paper makers. It's such a good time. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome everybody to this week's Artist Book House Evanston Bound Curator. I'm Jamie Tomey, and I'm so happy everybody is here today. I'm really excited about this one because this person today is amazing. And she fits all of the boxes of Artist Book House. So I'm just beside myself with excitement to welcome Riva Lehrer to our house. She's giggling. And we decided that it was Black Glasses Day. We matched, so I'm happy about that as well. So let me run through. Let me run through real quick your bio here. Riva Lehrer is an artist, writer, and curator who focuses on the socially challenged body. She is best known for representation of people whose physical embodiment, sexuality, or gender identity have long been stigmatized. Ms. Lehrer's work has been seen in venues including National Portrait Gallery of the Smithsonian, Yale University, the United Nations, the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., the Arnot Museum, the deCordova Museum, the Frye Museum, the Chicago Cultural Museum Center, and the State of Illinois Museum, and soon to be in the Artist Book House Gallery, hopefully, knock on wood. Awards include 2017 Three Arts MacDowell Fellowship for Writing, 2015 Three Arts Residency Fellowship at the University of Illinois, 2014 Carnegie Mellon Fellowship at Haverford and Bryn colleges, 2009 Prairie Fellowship over at Ragdale. Grants include 2009 Critical Fierceness Grant, 2008 Three Arts Foundation Grant, and the 2006 Wynne Newhouse Award for Excellence. And that comes from New York City, as well as grants from the Illinois Arts Council, University of Illinois, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Her memoir just was published this October, and I have it right here that I want to show everyone. In case you haven't seen this yet, you need to get it. I'm not sure I'm showing this exactly right. It's a gorgeous cover, and of course the painting is by Riva on the cover, and the book is just out in paperback, came out in October.
No, it's in hardback.
Hardcover right now, yes. And Riva teaches at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, and she teaches painting on Zoom right now. And she's also an instructor in the Medical Humanities Department here at Northwestern. Riva, welcome.
Hey, hi Jamie. Hi Frank.
We're so excited. We're so excited to have you here. And as I was mentioning earlier, you fit all of these boxes that come into Artist Book House. You're an artist and you're a writer, and I'm assuming you live in somewhere that you can contain as a house. When did you realize growing up that you were an artist?
That's a weird question. Let's see. It's supposed to be doing speaker view. Oh, there I am. Okay.
Yeah, I got you.
Actually speaking. Boy, I look like hell this morning. Sorry, people.
It's okay. We're all in the same position. You do not look like hell. You look gorgeous, and I love your hair.
You look like a cartoon character that escaped its frame. Anyway, so the question, how did I know? Well, so I was one of those art kids. I mean, I'm imagining most of us out there in Zoom land watching that we're all art kids, you know, the ones who wanted to go off and do that instead of play soccer or whatever. When I was young, nobody heard of soccer, so softball in the streets. But there comes a point that, I mean, most kids like making art. Some are better at it, some are not, you know. that doesn't necessarily determine who goes to art school.
Mm-hmm.
As I was explaining to someone last night, there were other things I loved. I always loved biology, and I loved writing. But I thought for a long time I wanted to go into medicine or the sciences. But when I was a kid, if you were disabled, that was not going to happen. People like me did not go to med school. And then another aspect was that, it's a very long story, which is in the book, but I went to special school when I was a kid that was very unusual in that it was trying to give us a standard academic education, which at the time they didn't do for kids with disabilities. When I was born back in 1958, I am an actual old person. Most kids like me were institutionalized, and the ones, if you were in an institution, you didn't really come out again, almost ever.
Mm-hmm.
And you might get a very rudimentary education that would let you do things like work in a sheltered kind of a sweatshop.
Yeah.
And other than that, it was the few day schools, you know, were more about just kind of, again, vocational training of some kind. So the school I went to, on one hand, they tried to give us a standard education as much as they could without much in the way of special ed pedagogy. My classes were full of, and this is an answer to your question. I just have to do a little bit.
Oh, no, of course.
I'm actually answering your question. So the classes at my school were mixed in terms of what kind of impairments the kids had. And so they were trying to teach kids with not only a large range of cognitive, intellectual capabilities. Some of the kids couldn't take their own notes, you know, if they had some form of, let's say, cerebral palsy. Some kids, I don't know what their sensory equipment was like, but the point is that they're giving us these lessons that really were not titrated for wherever you were. So they were kind of brought down a little bit to the, I don't like lowest common denominator, but something like that, something that most of us could follow. And the upshot for me was that if it wasn't something where I was getting tutoring at home, like in writing, my mother would tutor me a lot in writing. I came out of school several years behind most kids in the public school system. So I went to this very competitive high school, and I entered 3 or 4 years behind in mathematics, and I'd always had dyscalculia. So the upshot was that by the time I was getting ready to go to college, some of my grades were not good because nobody was really helping me make up those 2 to 4 years of academic deficit on top of whatever cognitive, intellectual disabilities I may have had. I really, I think dyscalculia was the main thing. But you have to have very good math scores in order to get into med school. And so the upshot was that by the time I had to decide what I was going to do professionally, and I really was not encouraged to be professional by my family or by anybody. I mean, I was going to college because I was smart, but there really wasn't much vision about what I was going to do with it. The consensus was that I was supposed to be a kindergarten teacher because I was short.
Oh my God.
Did not work for me at all. So art school was something that I'd always been good at. I didn't need to have superlative grades. I could do it at home, even if I was dealing with healing from some medical event. And the other main thing is that the art room had always been my safe place, both in elementary school, but in a way even more in high school because I was completely a pariah in high school.
Yeah.
Totally ostracized except for a little handful of kids. And, but at the art room, I ended up being the teacher's sort of informal TA.
Yeah.
So that's where I fled to feel like I was good at anything, worth anything.
Yeah.
And then the other thing about art school, and I think a lot of us can relate to this, is that when you know you're different, whatever your talents may be, there's an idea that art school is something like art school itself, theater school, dance school, something like that, is going to be the home of the weirdos. And that you're
Yeah.
going to find people and you're going to be accepted. And just parenthetically, as a teacher, what I've found is that that's often very problematic because those of us who are different, and back then and still now, being physically impaired is not a good situation if you're going to go to art school. Art
Yeah.
schools are not set up to accommodate. I mean, they're barely starting to now, just this much, just great,
Yeah.
but this much. If you have a physical impairment or a sensory impairment, anything significant, really all they're set up for is dealing with psychiatric and behavioral impairments. They kind of have a system in place
Yeah.
for that, but not much else. So what often happens to people who go, I think, to schools for the different is that you enter with this fantasy of perfect accommodation, of perfect acceptance above all else. But it's not there, it can't be there. And so often for a lot of people, when you start art school with this desire to fit in when you never have, and you don't right away, it's really hard. I think that's why a lot of kids, their first year often have major psychiatric events during freshman year or beginning of sophomore year, because it's not the seamless open arms that they've been hoping for.
Yeah. Yeah. So you teach at the School of the Art Institute here in Chicago.
I do.
Where did you go to school? Where was that place for you that you dreamed was the welcoming arms that ended up maybe being a little bit more difficult, but maybe not? Where did you end up going to school? You grew up in Cincinnati, right?
I did.
Yeah. So where did you go to college, and then and what was that? Did you major in painting specifically?
I got into a lot of good schools, which was great. And I didn't get to go to any of them.
Oh.
I got a full scholarship. Yay.
Yay.
But I'm happy for my father. It took a lot of burden off my father. And in retrospect, I'm grateful for that. But I ended up getting a full ride to the University of Cincinnati, which at the time was a dreadful art school, just dreadful.
Goodness.
And everything I wanted to study, they didn't offer. And,
no.
But I did find deep and abiding, profound friendships. And it didn't happen right away. It took really until the end of my first year to find that thing I'd been looking for. But in terms of my training, it was almost useless. So then after that, I went to the School of the Art Institute on and off for several years. The problem there, what they offered was somewhat more in line with what I wanted, but what I had really wanted was to go somewhere like Tyler or PAFA or something and get really hardcore academic chops in figures.
Oh, okay.
Really traditional. And neither the Art Institute nor Cincinnati had anything like that. So everything I know is pretty close to self-taught.
Yeah.
Very frustrating. But the Art Institute, School of the Art Institute so U of Cincinnati was tremendously, horribly, disgustingly conservative.
Yeah. Oh no.
Really misogynist, um, really retrogressive, just, ugh.
Yeah.
Um, and SCIC was not, and that was the great blessing of going there.
Yeah.
That at least conceptually, I learned about contemporary art, which University of Cincinnati really
Probably didn't recognize.
like.
Or yeah.
We had one feminist teacher who was like, "Let me tell you that there's this thing called feminist art. Don't tell anybody, I'll get fired." Like,
Oh goodness.
like that.
So did that experience shape your I guess this question is, how did that experience back at Cincinnati with the idea of feminist art being subversive, I guess, or not mainstream or not accepted, or I'm telling you about this but I might get fired. How did that shape your views and your ideas when you came to the Art Institute and since then? Because your work is very much about, like your bio says, representing people whose physical embodiment, sexuality, or gender identity have been stigmatized. So there's a lot of, I don't want to politicize it, but there's a lot of political and, yeah, I don't want to politicize it. I just want to say you hold people up and shed lights on things that aren't necessarily always shed light shed on. Did that shape you? Were you starting to think that way before you went to Cincinnati, or did Cincinnati, like the rebel came out in Cincinnati and then you started making the work? What do you think? Can you talk about that for a minute?
I mean, the rebel was definitely coming out in Cincinnati. I would bring my work to class and get like crickets, or
Yeah.
people saying, "Why are you doing this?" That anytime I started to approach, even so timidly, you have no idea how timid my work was for decades. But any little bit of addressing embodiment from my perspective at all would
At
just get
all.
completely shot down, or stop conversations cold, and nobody would talk to me. I mean, we might talk about how I was putting down a line, and that would kind of be it.
Sure.
But don't worry about politicizing, because my work is political.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
It's not capital P political, in that I am trying not to do agitprop. But it's definitely political, in terms of wanting to change how people see people whose bodies are stigmatized. And it's not
Yeah.
just people with impairments, it's people who get, culturally beat up for gender presentation,
Yeah.
sexuality, race, anything that is visible, behavioral, how you present yourself. I am utterly fascinated by how that affects how you live in the world.
Yeah.
But the thing is that most political figuration, and this is still even true, so there's incredible figuration going on right now, about the Black experience, or the African experience too. There are African banners that are, these people are my gods right now. But a lot of them, even though the work is framed as a portrait, what I find is that sometimes they're a little bit generalized, and often in attitudes of anger. It's becoming less true. But most people don't recognize figuration as political unless it's expressing direct anger and defiance, or
Okay.
pain.
Right.
And I intentionally don't do that for complicated reasons. So, like I said, I'm not trying to do agitprop at all.
Right.
But I do want the imagery to have a cultural impact.
Right, of course. And a lot of the work of your paintings, your portraiture, is showing to me, and this is how I have viewed it through the years, the soul of the person who is there. And I think, okay, so let me just do an aside real quick, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but you have an op-ed in the New York Times this morning that I want to touch on in a minute, but it takes you to another conversation that you had with a woman, Alice Wong. You did her portrait on Zoom. And so I read the second article, your conversation with Miss Wong, and there's a point in the conversation where you're talking about how an able-bodied person approached one of your portraits. I don't have the quote, and was like saying something about, not about the person in the portrait, but about their disability first and foremost. Like they saw the cane or they saw the wheelchair. They didn't see the person. Can you talk about that a little bit? Do you know what I'm talking about? What quote I'm talking about?
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry, hold on one sec.
Yeah.
So dry in here, I think it. Oh boy, there's bags under my eyes.
Oh, you're
maybe
fine.
That's where my socks were.
Here's the thing about a portrait artist. She sees everything.
I see everything. Anyway.
Every single little
thing. A row of black boxes. You all are hiding from me.
Oh, what does that say? Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway,
go ahead. Sorry.
So this has long been true, so before I was even doing portraits, I was doing paintings about myself in the hospital and things like that. And sometimes they were paintings about transcendence, about transcendent experiences I'd had in the hospital or in medical settings. And but I noticed that as soon as a medical device would be in the image, that it would just get yanked immediately into, oh, this is something sad. This is something, this is a sad painting. And I mean, there was one literally that there's like a rainbow of brilliant light coming off this woman sitting in a hospital bed who's sitting in lotus position and is clearly like having this intensely spiritual experience. And I got told that that was a sad painting. So
because of the hospital bed.
Because it was in the hospital.
Oh my goodness.
And so I learned early on that if there was anything that would signal impairment, that it was going to be just like those old hooks that they would use to get people off stage.
Yeah.
But since then, what I've come up with is something I call a pain reading. And what a pain reading is that there are certain kinds of experience, certainly disability, and traditionally, up until recently, I would argue Black experience as well. And I know I had a list of others, but let's say those two. That to be in that position was to live in pain, that there was something tragic about your existence. And for the Black community, it was their cultural position, their economic position, and above all, the inheritance of slavery as being the sort of baseline of suffering. And that when you have an identity that's like that, and for a long time, queerness was like that up until the 80s, really, late 80s.
I would argue still now, but yes.
Yeah. Well, if you're a public, anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
But if you're somebody that the state of your existence is considered to be something that is deleterious, either to society or to yourself, usually those are inseparable, that your reality is one of pain, that you're always in a state of suffering.
That's the baseline of your life.
That is the truth. That is the both bedrock and above.
Right. Gotcha.
So if you do an image of someone in that identity, in which they seem to be happy or contemplative or seductive or anything that is not a pain state. The idea is that they're compensating for their pain, that underneath what you're seeing is authentically pain. So if you're smiling as a disabled person, you are overcoming. You're rising above your terrible.
Right.
So what kept happening and still happens is that if I make a picture of someone who's different in any way, and they seem to be not suffering in the image, I will hear something like, oh, but they're in a wheelchair, but they're a little person, but they don't have an arm, but they, so,
Right.
Poor thing, they look so happy, but.
Right.
So that is what I have to contend with. So if I make an image in which, in particular, a disabled person seems to be angry, or in a state of, if I try and depict someone in a state of societal suffering, because that is where our suffering generally comes from. I mean, there's stuff that your body does to you, pain.
Sure.
But that is, for most of us, that's not every minute of the day. And that isn't, like I'm sitting here at my desk, obviously, and all those coats behind me are calling me to go do my daily run. So I do a daily run every day,
Yeah.
It's basically a fast limp, but I call it a run.
Sure.
Speed. But like I will be out on my run, and this happens all the time, where either someone will stop and pull up next to me and ask me if I need a ride anywhere. Occasionally, if I need a ride to the hospital, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
Or they'll say something which is in some ways even worse, which is, you're so brave to be out here. I see you every day and you're such an inspiration.
Right.
And they don't understand why I tell them to F off and leave me alone. And they're like, but.
Right. Right.
So if I depict somebody with the kind of anger and rage and political fire that I actually feel, or that more to the point that my sitters feel, it will be flipped into this idea that what we're seeing isn't a political state, that they're angry because they're in this body.
Okay.
Yeah. They don't want to be this person. It's not about how this body is treated. The idea is that they're miserable because of who they are.
Right.
So
Right.
it's very tricky. And that's why my work doesn't read like what we think of as political figuration.
Right. Right. Let's flip a minute. So when you are doing a portrait in normal times, how does that work for you? Do you paint from life? You have someone sitting with you. How long does a portrait take normal times? And then secondary to that question, how has that changed for you during the pandemic? And I'm actually I dropped your website into the chat, but I'm also going to drop the op-ed from this morning into the chat so people can reference that later if they haven't yet read it, from the New York Times. So normal times, non-pandemic times, you have somebody in your studio, you have multiple times that they're sitting for you. How does the portrait grow during normal times?
In normal times, I have several ethical structures that I work within. The basic principles of my portraiture are, number one, because I'm working with people for whom very often being looked at is painful. I work strenuously with people to make sure that the image that we're working on, first off, feels true to their experience, that I'm not coming in and saying, I'm going to depict you as a flying, wombat, because
Right.
I look at you and
Right.
I see a flying wombat, like, I'm not going to do that. If they
Yeah.
come to me and say, I feel that my inner self is a flying wombat, we'll go in that direction. But
Sure.
I try really hard, even if I get a strong image, I try very hard not to get too attached.
Yeah.
So the first thing is, there's a lot of conversations, sometimes up to a year, at times, of conversation about their experience of themselves, of being seen, their inner symbols, all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then we work slowly through the initial idea for the portrait until we get to something where then they'll start posing in situ. So
Mm-hmm.
up until recently, it's been a situation where we would get a predetermined image, and then we would produce that position with props and costumes and stuff.
Right.
Now, and also ancillary to that, because I work with people whose bodies often need a certain amount of accommodation, that the hosting part, the caretaking of my collaborator, and I try usually to call them my collaborator, not my subject, because this is so collaborative.
Yeah.
There'll be like blankets and pillows and footstools and cookies and cocktails and hot chocolate and music and whatever they need,
Yeah.
And I had a show a couple of years ago at the Evanston Arts Center that was one portrait, and I got in a big fight with them. That was interesting. They didn't want to show it.
The Evanston Art Center didn't?
Mhm.
Oh.
It's a portrait of someone wearing BDSM gear.
Oh, okay.
They had known about it, but they gave me the show during summer camp, I guess.
Okay.
Out about the children seeing it. And of course,
Yeah.
the children aren't going to know. I mean, they knew that I work with nudes all the time. They'd given me the show based on another nude that they had.
Right. Right.
So they knew. Only the adults, and only a few of the adults, would even know what this
Right.
person was wearing.
Right.
Most people thought that she was wearing jewelry, some kind of elaborate jewelry, which
Right.
way it was. But the point is that when I showed that piece, it put me upstairs away from the children.
Right.
Pretty funny.
Right.
With a
Right.
screen, with a screen,
Right.
with
And
an advisory on it.
with a warning label on your artwork.
Danger, your children be turned into
Thinkers.
sadomasochists.
Right. Right.
Perverts.
Just from looking at this portrait once during the 2 weeks of camp.
On their way to make, ashtrays. Anyway,
Sure.
the point is that what I did in that show, and I'll get back to your question, is that I recreated the entire corner where my subject had sat. I brought in the chair and the table and the plates of cookies and the heating pad and the pillows and everything. And on one wall was a whole wall of text of our conversation. We recorded our conversations during our collaboration, and then also produced wall text. And so the point of all that was that in everything that I'm going to talk about, the relationship between the artist and the subject is what really interests me. The way that they're changed, the way both of them are changed, the way the artist feels about being looked at by the subject, how the relationship evolves, the kind of trust that both of you have to have.
Yeah.
I've been doing this series where, well, I won't go into that. It's a long story, but so there are different iterations of this, different ways I approach the power relationship.
Yeah.
And now here is my apartment.
Yeah.
Do you see anybody here? Off in the far corner.
Right.
Far corner.
There's your studio.
Norbert, my teaching assistant, who is very dressed up. But that is that's the only person in my studio. And so
Yeah.
I'm doing two things. I'm working over Zoom, which is how I did Alice Wong's portrait series of sittings. I'm now working with Sharona Pearl over Zoom. In Alice's piece, I worked really hard to make her image clear. With Sharona, because our connection is pretty bad, her internet connection isn't very good. I'm going to start altering the drawing to show that I can't see a lot, that things are blurred.
Yeah.
And I'm also hiring photographers out of town. I'm about to start a year-long enormous portrait painting of Rosemary Garland Thompson, who's one of the primary disability studies and bioethics scholars in the world.
Oh.
And Rosemary's in San Francisco, as is Alice, actually. And what I did was I found a photographer in San Francisco. I don't like working from photographs, but I don't know when this is going to end.
Right.
So we set up a photo shoot in San Francisco at Rosemary's house. And Crystal, our photographer, I art directed over Zoom.
Oh, wow.
So she sent me the reference photos about 3 weeks ago, and they're beautiful. They're beautiful, but this is all frustrating. This is not the continuous bonding relationship
you
usually have.
And with your collaborators.
Yeah, and like with Sharona, her kids are coming in and out of the room all the time, but it's appropriate to our moment, isn't it?
Yeah. It's how we have to do things right now if we're going to do things. And I think it adds a layer on top of all the layers of your work. It adds another layer to it because you don't get to have that one-on-one personal connection. So how does the screen shift what you're seeing, like you mentioned, but also how you have to do things? Because a photograph is different than a screen, which is different than being with a person. There was a question in the chat from Nancy. Does Ms. Lehrer approach a collaborator to pose, or do people approach you to suggest themselves? How do you find your collaborators?
Almost always, it's that I know their work. I'm very involved in disability culture, gender studies, also various other things. I go to a lot of, up until recently, I have gone to God knows how many conferences and arts festivals and performances, and so usually I will learn about someone's work, and perhaps I'll have met them somewhere and seen them present, and then I go off and do some research. I prefer to ask the person because when someone approaches me, they usually are coming with a lot of fantasies about what this would be like.
Yeah.
And often it's not somebody to do one of these. I have to have somebody around one way or another for hours, days, weeks, 2 years at one point that it took to finish something. I need it to be someone I really want to spend time with.
Yeah, you need to enjoy that person, and they need to enjoy you. It's a relationship that you're building.
I almost never do commissions. On the rare occasions that I've done them, I really regret them. Most of the time.
Yeah.
The power dynamic's completely different when somebody approaches me. And I've already gotten, since the op-ed came out, I've gotten 3 requests just this morning on my website, whether or not I would do somebody's portrait.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit, and we could talk about this for hours, I know. And I would love to one day sit with you with coffee or hot chocolate and talk for hours. But I want to talk about your memoir and how it came about, and how was writing your memoir similar to creating that collaborative portrait, and how was it different for you? because you mentioned earlier that you have always been a writer. How did this come about for you? What was the impetus for writing this book?
Originally, I wanted to make a document for my family. That after I'm not here anymore, they will be my, though at this point they'll be both my literary and my arts executors. But I always knew they'd be my arts executors. So I wanted to leave some kind of substantial explanation so that they could give it to
People,
museum collectors, whatever, after I was gone.
Yeah, like an extended artist statement kind of thing.
Yeah, very extended.
Very extended. How many pages is this? 400?
Don't even. There's a book inside a book inside it. So there's several books inside there.
Yeah.
Speaking.
And it's got, I love the section that talks about the different portraits too. I can't wait to dive into that part. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. But whenever I give lectures about my work, I've always had to do some personal explanation about, how I came to my ideas about beauty, why I started working with disability, this kind of thing, and queerness. So I always had to tell some of my story when I was doing that kind of work. And so some things came up when I was trying to explain some of my personal history in writing this, that I had some questions about my family. I realized there were things I didn't actually know.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to interview my family members that are still around. And I started to get stories about stuff I had no idea.
Oh.
And completely, the book just went, and it turned out, well, what it turned out to be, which I realized kind of 2/3 of the way through, kind of, it doesn't matter to me that it's my life. I don't actually think my life is that interesting. I certainly know lots of people whose lives are much more interesting than mine. But what my life does let me do is to open up and explore realities of embodiment that that I do care passionately about and that I do depict in my work. And so I started to realize as I was going back and rewriting the book and rewriting the book was written 4 separate times.
Oh, wow.
4 times.
Yeah.
And so by the last iteration, I was very clear that I was using my life in order to talk about stuff that was important to me, not the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah. And it came out in October, which is exactly the wrong time for things to come out right now. I'm going to actually cancel your spotlight video real quick and show the book again on the screen here. And the painting again on the cover is one of you. It's a self-portrait, and there's a body, and then you can see, I'm not doing very well holding this up to the camera, but you can see this x-ray on the top. And so this book came out in October, and so you were, oh yay,
that's the full image.
That is gorgeous.
I don't know if people can see that or not.
Yeah, they can. Let me spotlight you again so you can hold that up again. I know people saw it, but I wanted them to see it more. So that's the image, the original image that's on the cover here. And and so the book came out in October, which again, mid-pandemic, you had a book tour that was scheduled. You were supposed to go to multiple places to promote the book. It is just terrible that it came out this year. Not terrible that it came out this year. Yay, it came out this year. But just in the middle of a pandemic, all of the things shutting down, how has that shifted for you, the promotional process? And I know you've had several Zooms with different bookstores, at least here in Chicago. I know I missed the one for Women and Children First, which I was disappointed to miss that night. But we have family Zoom. So I was at family Zoom, but can you talk about that a little bit, about just that I like, this is a really important book to be out in the world.
Thank
and
you.
now is the time that it came out, which is a disappointment.
So there have been so many disasters. The book was supposed to come out last June, which would have been difficult, but in retrospect, not as bad as now.
As now, right.
But my original editor, we were about to go into final edits before going to PDF.
Mm-hmm.
And they left abruptly with no warning,
They left Penguin?
They left Penguin to establish a Buddhist monastery in upstate New York.
Sure.
At the worst possible, just horrible. So then it took a while for them to figure out what they were going to do with me. I was afraid I was going to get orphaned. But my publisher / editor, who is this legendary guy named Christopher Jackson, who's one of the few African Americans in upper level publishing. He's like Ta-Nehisi Coates' editor.
Oh, wow.
One World, so Coates and Trevor Noah and Anita Garza and Eve Ewing and Mira Jacob and like lots and lots of people, particularly in the in Black literary movement.
Yeah.
Is with One World. So Chris is brilliant, but he was flooded because Victory left and Chris had to pick up all these books that had been on Victory's desk. So so they decided to move me to the fall.
Yeah.
And they originally had said that they weren't going to publish me in the fall because that's when all the big books come out and new authors just get run over. But then they said, and this is before pandemic,
right,
said that that because of the election, which was, nobody should come out during election unless it's a book about the election. They said because of the election, a lot of the big publishers were moving their big books till after the first week in November, and that early fall was going to be empty, and that actually it was turning into a really good time to be published. So I was like, okay, if you think so. So we put that whole machinery into action, and then the pandemic hit. And then all those same publishers that had said, we're going to wait, they're all like, oh, everybody's stuck at home and they need something to read. So now we're going to rush our books.
Okay.
So all these huge books came out, like the Obama, for instance, came out the week of my book.
Yeah, exactly.
Came out. And then at the same time, just to make things extra special, and of course, COVID, canceled my entire book tour, which had been pretty extensive. At the same time, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died right beforehand. And Amy Coney Barrett was during. And so I think a lot of people we had interest from Vogue and Elle and O Magazine and Good Morning America and the New York Times and all these places that said that they were going to do something with my book. They really liked it.
Yeah.
Then all this stuff happened and they just went running off. And the pages got totally filled with all of that. And they told my publicist, come back, after the election and we'll take another look. So she went back after the election and they said, oh, her book's too old now.
Which it means it's like a month and a half old.
Now.
Yeah.
A month. At the time it was a month old.
Yeah.
But they said, we only cover books the week they come out.
Oh, goodness.
After having told us to go away.
Right.
They promised to look at it again. So we've gotten almost no national attention. I was on Scott Simon, which was nice, but that was right during Coney Barrett, and it just got wiped.
It just got buried
completely. I mean, the book was buried, and my editor had thought that this was going to be a bestseller. I mean, they really, really had faith in the book. And, you know, frankly, between all 6 of us, the book's having a hard time.
Yeah.
Not because of the quality, but because, as my editors told me, the only books doing well right now were books about politics, books about race, and books by celebrities. And
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
gets to like the little nasty cherry on top is that I looked at all of the best of lists where Chris had thought the book would be all over the best of lists. I hate to be complaining this much, but this is what reality is for somebody like me. I looked at the best of lists, and there is virtually nothing about disability. Nothing. The
Yeah.
only books are, I mean, there's Michael J., and I'm not kidding, Michael J. Fox's, I think, 4th memoir about
Yeah.
Parkinson's.
Yeah.
There's a book by a friend of mine, which is very good, called What Can a Body Do? But it's written by, and it's a really good book and nothing negative about Sarah, but she is an able-bodied professor who is writing about disability, not from the standpoint of being disabled.
Right.
It's a book about helping people with disabilities.
Right.
And that's generally, if you look at awards, whether it's like Guggenheim or MacArthur or, you know, if you're doing something for the disabled community, you'll get a lot of attention. If you're doing something as a member of the disabled community,
It's shunned.
almost never.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
lot of good books came out this year, and none of them, just about are on any of the best of the end of the year lists or the
Yeah.
awards lists or the short lists or the, so, you know, Chris was like, the media can't pay attention to more than one thing at a time. You know, a year ago it was, or 2 years ago it was Me Too. And
Right.
since then it's been BLM. And those things are all in desperate need of attention. But disability is never it, even in a goddamn pandemic.
Right. When people need to be taken care of, everybody's wearing masks or should be wearing masks because of our most vulnerable people. And a lot of disabled people have things that they can't even go out and do because of the pandemic.
We can teach you guys how to do this.
Yeah.
We have the chops, we have the knowledge, we have the protocol, we have the discipline. We
Yeah.
can teach. I mean, it's not just let's feel sorry for us. We actually are this huge resource.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, like people were calling me off the bat because I was, I don't mean to get upset. But like I was posting on Facebook right away what kind of protocols I was using.
Yeah.
And, you know, mine are generally more rigorous than most people's that I know. And the disabled people I know, same deal. We've come up with a lot of technique. And it's like, hey, we're right here. Not only
Yeah.
are you threatening to take away our, you know, healthcare rationing, so we're going to sink to the bottom of who
Right.
gets the care. Right. I mean, we were just told that explicitly, right away, explicitly in
Right.
public, that if we had a profound disability, we were going to be considered not as valuable as an able-bodied 30-year-old who needed the ventilator.
Right.
Number one. We can't go see our doctors. A lot of us are suffering because we can't go see. I haven't seen my doctor since February.
Yeah.
And
Because you can't go actually to the doctor. Like it's too dangerous to go to the doctor.
I can't walk into the hospital.
Yeah.
Like most of my doctors are at Northwestern, and they're up on like the 21st, 22nd, 24th floors.
Yeah.
I don't want to walk into an elevator
Yeah.
and be in elevators, you know, it's,
Yeah.
then, you know, we have pre-existing conditions that mean that we're
You can't. Yeah.
and so I just feel like my book is so urgent right now to like remind people that we exist and who we are and what we're worth.
Right.
And everything's just conspired against it.
Yeah.
incredibly difficult way. And I'm grateful so much for the attention that it does get, for the respect it does get. The book is not just about me. The book is about a community. It's about a world of people who have worked together to change what it means to be different. And when I'm out there, I'm trying really hard to not make this about me, to make it be about a group experience. And I'm doing what I can.
You're doing what you can. I'm going to wrap up in a minute, but there were some things in the chat. Riva Angela Lyon-Smith says, Riva, you have been influential in changing the narrative about disability by asking people to witness the range of emotion and bodies that express them, range of emotions and the bodies that express them, and sharing your words and perspective to challenge our and society's thinking. What would you ask of those who witness your work? That's a really deep question, Angela. And it might be a lot at this very last minute to ask of you, Riva. I'm sorry.
I guess the only thing I can really say is, whatever you think about my experience, remember that it's not specific to me. That, the details of my family and stuff, but the overarching themes are not specific to me. And they're not even specific to disability.
Yeah.
If there's something that seems true to you as a philosophical or moral stance, try and hold it as something to pull up and out of yourself in a lot of situations, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for answering that question. And then back when we were talking about your book and needing to come out at this time, Ellen said, maybe a good time. Connections are more important now. Politics is a hot, thin soup. And Leah says, love this. Thank you, Riva. I've been following your work forever. Thanks, Jamie. And she had to log out. And then Angela just responded, thank you, Riva, for the life you lead and the person that you are. So on that note, I'm actually going to spotlight me real quick. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Of course, this is our Evanston Bound Curator with Riva Lehrer. I'm so touched that you came, Riva, and had just such a lovely conversation. And again, we could talk for several more hours about all of these things. I think I have about 4 more questions that I wanted to touch on with you, but that's for another time. So those of you who are new to Artist Book House, we're a brand new scrappy little organization here in Chicagoland, and you can visit our website at artists, and the artists is plural, bookhouse.org. And if you want to throw a little donation our way, that would be very much appreciated. And if you haven't been able to see all the curators live, you can go on there and just go through them and watch them. This is our second to last curator for 2020 and for live. So thank you everybody for coming. Hi again. Thank you so much for watching this week's curator. We really appreciate your support. If you want to learn more about our guest from today, please read the description below. And if you'd like to support more programming like this, coming from Artist Book House, please visit our website at artistbookhouse.org/donate. Thank you again for joining us.